Hey everybody, Robert from Black Belt Gaming. I hope you're doing well. I thought I'd make another entry into my Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition series. This is where I am looking back on the rules, remembering how we used to play, and then taking a look at the rules as they really are and seeing if we did things the same or if there were things that we perhaps missed or didn't even use at all. So I'm sort of rediscovering First Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and taking a fresh look at it. Today I thought I would go into the Ranger and perhaps even talk a little bit about two-weapon fighting and animal companions. All of this as how we played it back in the old days. So the Rangers are a subclass of fighter. They're adept at woodcraft, tracking, scouting, infiltration, and spying. First edition Rangers needed to be of a good alignment. They could be lawful, chaotic, or neutral. And they needed to have some pretty good ability scores. They needed to have a strength of not less than 13, an intelligence of not less than 13, a wisdom of not less than 14, and a 14 or greater constitution. If a ranger has ability scores of greater than 15 in strength, intelligence, and wisdom, so I think it's all three here, he or she gains a benefit of adding 10% experience points awarded by the referee. So typically your fighter types, like fighters and paladins, they have a D10, but rangers actually have a D8 for their hit dice. The unusual thing about rangers is they're especially tough at first level. So rangers get 2 D8s, a roll of 2 times at first level, where I believe almost all the other characters just get a single hit dice at first level. They get 11 hit dice rather than 9, and we can kind of look at that at a different chart a little later. In addition to considerable prowess as fighters, they also have druidic and magical spell capabilities as they attain higher levels. They're very, very formidable opponents. So they also get some other abilities. When they're fighting creatures of the giant class, they add 1 hit point to each level of experience, for each level of experience they have attained, to the points of damage scored when they hit. So that means, if you're a 5th level fighter, you're going to be adding 5 more points of damage when you hit a monster in this giant class. Now, if you're thinking about just giants, like hill giants and such, it's actually much broader than that. We're actually considering creatures here: bugbears, ettins, giants, gnolls, goblins, hobgoblins, kobolds are actually in the giant class, ogres, orcs and trolls. They're all considered to be in this same class. If you're using the surprise rules as written in first edition, rangers surprise opponents 50% of the time, so a score of 1 through 3, so they're good at ambushing. And they are themselves surprised only 1 in 6, so not so often. Tracking. We know that rangers in most editions of Dungeons & Dragons have some sort of tracking ability. Instead of something that tends to level up with the ranger and become almost like a thief skill, something that increases as the ranger increases his level, I believe in first edition it came as a standard number. So the ranger just had a chance to do these things, and throughout his adventuring career, what would alter the percentage chance for success would be the conditions. So a ranger may need to observe a creature for a while. It says underground, the ranger must have observed the creature to be tracked within 3 turns, so within 30 minutes of a commencement of tracking. And the ranger must begin tracking at a place where the creature was observed. So I guess you can sort of watch, and then that creature can go, and then within 30 minutes you can start tracking it. So chance to track. It's kind of based on where you're tracking them. So if you're going along a normal passage in a normal room or so, it's a 65% chance. Passes through a door or uses stairs, which goes to 55. Goes through a trap door, 45. Goes up or down a chimney or through a concealed door, 35. A secret door is 25%. So outdoor, it's a little different. There's a base chance of 90%. So very good at tracking outdoors. And for each creature above 1 in the party, you get a plus 2%. And for every 24 hours that have passed between making the track and tracking the creature, so for each day that passes, you lose 10%. And if there is rain or such, could be snow, if there's a lot of precipitation, for each hour of precipitation, you're going to lose 25%. So those tracks could wash away. Continuing first edition rangers at around 8th level, so this is a while, start to gain limited druidic ability. And at 9th level, they start to gain some limited magic user ability. So rangers cannot read druidic or magic user spells from magic scrolls in any event. So that's interesting. They gain some spell casting, but they can't read the scrolls. At 10th level, rangers are able to employ all non-written magic items, which pertains to clairaudience, clairvoyance, ESP, and telepathy. Also at 10th level, the ranger attracts a body of 2 to 24 followers. Note that these henchmen, once lost, can never be replaced, although mercenaries can be hired, of course. These followers are determined by the DM, who informs the ranger. So there are some restrictions for being a ranger in first edition. Any change to a non-good alignment immediately strips the ranger of all benefits, and he becomes a fighter with an 8-sided dice and can never regain ranger status. Rangers cannot hire men-at-arms, servants, aides, or henchmen until they attain 8th level or higher. And strangely, no more than 3 rangers may ever operate together at any time. On the next page here, rangers may only own those goods and treasure which they can carry on their person or upon their mount. All excess must be donated to a worthy institution or cause. Now, let's look at the experience points levels. We see the different titles. Rangers start out as called something called a runner. A 2nd level ranger is called a strider. They have other names as they progress, like scout and tracker and pathfinder, and then become a ranger at level 8, and a ranger knight at level 9, and a ranger lord at level 10. Still using the d8s for hit dice, as you see, getting 2 at first level, but they continue to roll for hit points past level 9 all the way to level 10, and then at 11th level and above they start getting a set 2 hit points per level after 10th level. So looking here, we kind of are finishing up some of the basic information. We see the spells. At 8th level, you get 1 druid spell. At 9th level, you keep your druid spell, but you get 1 magic user spell. And you slowly add a few spells as you go along. So if you're at like a maximum level, say ranger level 17, you can have 2 first level druidic spells, 2 second, 2 third, and you can have 2 magic user spells at first level and 2 at second level. That's about all the spell power you're going to get. Looking at the first edition attacks per melee round, the fighter and the paladin are the same, but the ranger lags behind just by about 1 level. So he doesn't get the extra attacks at 7th level. He's got to wait until 8th level. And then fighters and paladins get 2 attacks in 1 round at 13, but the ranger doesn't get that until 15. Just a note here, this is heading into a different book, so it's not really one of the original core books that I used back in the day, but I see here in Unearthed Arcana that tracking or rules for the ranger did change a bit. And if you want to consider something like Unearthed Arcana to be 1.5e, there did start to become this idea of this base chance increasing per level of the ranger. So that was not something that I grew up playing with, but it was something that started to come into play in late first edition. We can see here with outdoor tracking, the base chance is 10% per level of the ranger, plus an additional 10%. So, for example, 20% for a first level ranger, 70% for a 6th level ranger. And it can never rise. The base chance can rise as high as 110, but can never exceed that figure. So there are some other modifiers to take into account. Like I said, I think the rules in the player's handbook seem to be a little simpler to use. This one has a bit more modifiers and such going on. So here's a little something different from those of you that have played Rangers in other editions, including 2nd edition, I believe. Rangers can wear any armor. They can use any shields, and they can use any weapons. There is a little special note here for characters that are short and about how long of a weapon they can have, or how much of a heavy bow they can use. But there's no limitation to needing lighter armor in order to track. You can literally have a ranger in plate armor tracking, and that's fine, or setting an ambush and attacking. That's no problem in 1st edition. So here may be another shocker for you if you're not used to 1st edition. Dwarves could not be rangers. Elves could not be rangers. Gnomes, no. Half-elves, yes. Half-elves could be rangers up to 8th level. There's a special note here that half-elven fighters of less than 17 strength are limited to 6th level, so it's actually lower. Those of 17 strength are limited to 7th level. So it must mean that you have to have a strength of 18 to be able to go up to the full 8th level. Halflings can't be rangers. Half-orcs can't be rangers, but humans can, and there's no limitation on the level limitation. Many of you may be familiar with rangers being this dual wielding, attacking with two weapons. I believe it was second edition that started that. First edition, that wasn't a thing. As I remember back playing, attacking with two weapons was not so common. I think because we generally had lower ability scores and there were penalties involved. And I don't remember it being a part of any specific class ability, including the Ranger. Rangers didn't have any kind of bonus with attacking with two weapons. So that became a thing later. So attacks with two weapons, we're going to touch on that for a moment. You can choose to have a second weapon in your offhand. If you're right-handed, you could carry this in your left hand. But it needs to be either a dagger or a hand axe. So no dual-wielding scimitars. So it's either got to be a dagger or a hand axe, a lighter weapon. And there's a penalty. Actually, it says there's always a penalty. So your primary weapon is at -2, and your secondary weapon is at -4. And if we're looking at having better ability scores, like dexterity here, it starts to reduce those penalties. So if you go all the way up to an 18, your primary weapon is not going to have a penalty to it. Your secondary weapon is only going to be at -1. So it starts here, I believe, dexterity is above 15, then it starts to make some adjustments. So if you're an agile character, attacking with two weapons is probably worth it. You're not really facing that much penalty. The secondary weapon does not act as a shield or parrying device in any event. So what it does give you is, according to the interpretation of many, it gives you an extra attack each round. So actually, I would say, looking at it even further, as you get into multiple attacks per round, like let's say you're a ranger and you eventually get that 2 attacks per round, this attacking with two weapons becomes a part of what's technically considered your attack routine. So let's say you're a first level ranger and you're using two weapons, you can attack twice. You've just got to deal with the penalties of using two weapons. When you are a ranger and you get multiple attacks at higher levels, many people interpret that as meaning you get your attack routine 2 times. So that means you're really going to be attacking a total of 4 times in the round. 2 attacks as your first attack, and then another 2 attacks when you get your second attacks. And so if you interpret that differently for first edition, let me know. But that is a common interpretation, that 2 weapons always give you an extra attack for each attack that you have. I believe this may have been adjusted in other editions later, where perhaps that became too powerful, and I think it just became one single extra attack for the character. So no matter how many attacks they had, the additional weapon only granted you 1 more. But that's looking at some other editions. I can't recall off the top of my head where I remember reading that, but be interested to know, for those of you that played first edition, how you used attacks with 2 weapons. I honestly, remembering back to the days of learning the game and playing it often, I don't remember a lot of us using 2 weapons to attack with. It just didn't come up that often. So another point to touch on about the Rangers. Rangers in other editions, I don't exactly know when this started, but there kind of became the concept of the animal companion. And I don't remember there being any rules to adjudicate that in first edition. There could have been something in a magazine. There could even be something in the rule books that I just didn't notice. But back in our games, the way we played them, there were animal companions, but it was handled through gameplay. It was handled through role play. So one I remember was the character wasn't a ranger, but we had come across a dire wolf, and we that character, not my character, but that character had managed to come across some of the pups and kept one, and then through different games, like spending time in the, what would you say, the downtime or the off time between adventures, he was investing gold and time in getting this pup trained. And so it wasn't available to accompany him right away, but the DM, it was our good DM, allowed him to over time continue to invest and train this pup. And then eventually it started to come with him on adventures and follow some simple commands. And I eventually, when I went on an adventure with that character and the animal companion, the dire wolf, he was able to attack and, help us out in combat and help us out with, I believe, tracking and some other things. And so the dire wolf was not controlled by the player. The animal companion was controlled by the dungeon master. And so the dungeon master had the, I guess this information was shared with the character, the hit points and such. But as far as what the dire wolf would do in stressful situations, or how it would act during when we were camping or whatever, that was always controlled by the dungeon master. So it wasn't the under the character's control fully. It was an independent creature that had befriended the player character, and that's just how we handled that back in those days. Hey, before I finish making this video, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the first time I saw the Ranger in action. Most of the group I'd played with that taught me how to play first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had transferred over from Basic. And so classes that they usually tended to play were things like fighters and magic users. Definitely fighters and magic users, or multi-class fighter magic users, were definitely the most common. Occasionally there was a multi-class thief, but I very rarely saw in those early days anyone play the assassin. I did see one of the guys in our group play illusionist, and I'll talk about that maybe in another video. Even clerics were somewhat rare, so I kind of thought it would be interesting to fill that role, and I eventually started to take on the role of cleric a bit more. But Ranger, the first time I ever saw somebody playing a Ranger, it was back before I had the books, and I was getting familiar with the kind of fighter magic user types and the thief. I knew the thief existed. And we were playing one evening. There was a guy from the high school, so he was several years older than me and my friend. He was playing, and I only remember playing with him this once, but he was playing with us that night, and The dungeon master was, I believe it was our best dungeon master that was running the game. But the dungeon master screen was up, and this was the panel I was looking at. If you can see my screen here, this is the bearded fellow with the helmet. Looks like he has on maybe some plate armor. He's got a sword on his back, and he's leaning over this treasure chest, and he's pulling out of its scabbard this magical glowing sword. That was the panel I was staring at as we were playing, and it really kind of fused together with the concept of the first edition Ranger for me. As we were playing the game that night, we kind of described our characters as our party was forming to go on this adventure. And the way this guy described his character, he sounded like a fighter to me. He was in plate armor, beard, helmet, sword on his back, and all of that. So I was really thinking, oh, he must look like this guy. And I remember it had something to do with some goblins, and we were heading into a network of caves. I think it was a mine, and I was kind of letting the older players lead the way. I was still kind of new to the game, but I remember that this guy said that he was going to kneel down and check the tracks at the entrance. And I remember my head snapped over and looked at my other friend, and I had this confused look on my face. And he could immediately tell what my question was. And my question was, how can he do this? And my friend leaned over and he said, he's a ranger. He can do this. He has this ability. And so my interest just skyrocketed. I thought, this is neat. And I listened very closely to what was happening. He said he was going to check the tracks, and he was trying to get a count of approximately how many goblins had entered the mine. And the dungeon master was doing the die rolling behind the screen and was feeding him some information. And then we entered the tunnels. This guy kept checking the tracks as we were going along. He eventually had determined that what he thought was a bugbear had joined the group, and the party of goblins had split off into two different tunnels, with the bugbear leading a set of goblins down one passage and the other goblins going down another. And I remember thinking, this is such great information. He's not using any magic or anything. He's just able to do this. And this has given us some great insights into what we might be facing, or what we might want to try to avoid. I thought this was so neat. And, a fighter that could do these extra things. And so that experience that night really fired me up to get the player's handbook as soon as I could. And I remember when I got the player's handbook, Ranger was one of the first classes I wanted to look up and read about. And I wanted to read the rules about how this guy was able to do that. And so it's just an interesting point in my Dungeons & Dragons history that this image from the DM screen is what I kind of always think of when I think of a first edition Ranger. I don't think of a dual-wielding dark elf. I don't think of an archer, like a Robin Hood type. I don't think of a Beastmaster type character, with an animal companion. Those are not the images that spring to mind when I think about Ranger. I really just think of a fighter who had extra additional abilities beyond those of what a normal fighter could do. And so that's generally what I remember and think about. So I guess that'll wrap it up for me, talking about the first edition Rangers. Let me know if you have any interesting stories about playing a ranger in first edition and what it was like for you. I didn't play one very much back in those days. I think when I got older, I had a chance to finally play the class, but for many years, I didn't play the ranger, so didn't know a lot about them. So it's interesting to sort of revisit the rules and share with you the experience of one of the very few times I ever played with anyone who played the ranger class. Perhaps it was due to the you needed such good ability scores to qualify to be a ranger. Maybe that had something to do with it. But anyway, I think I'll stop there today. Thanks for listening, everybody.